Every morning I wake up at 5:30. Not because I have to be in a hurry, at my age there is no hurry, but simply because I've gotten so used to it over 50 years of working on construction sites. My body remembers. Evelyn always joked about it, said that even in my coffin I'd wake up with the first rooster. She didn't live to see me retire. It's been 7 years since she's been gone. I sit on the bed, feeling my joints aching. 72 is no joke, especially after so many years with cement mixers and rebar. I rest my palms on the old oak floor, the same one I laid with my own hands in 1983. Every board remembers the touch of my hands. This house is my life, my fortress. "Roland Quincy, you old geezer," I say to my reflection in the bathroom mirror. "We'll live yet." The face looking back at me is wrinkled and weathered, but the eyes are still the same, gray and stubborn. Evelyn always said she fell in love with that look, like a man who knows what he wants. After breakfast, oatmeal and coffee, strong as my will, I go out into the garden. The July morning greets me with bird song and the smell of the roses Evelyn has planted along the path. I tend them as if she's watching me from heaven and assessing my work. "Not bad for a builder," she would say with her special smile. The house on Elm Street in Bedford is more than just a building. I built it for my family when Elaine was only 5. I remember her, small and curious, hanging around while I was laying the foundation. "Daddy, can I have a room with a window facing east so the sun will wake me up?" Sure enough, I made her just such a room. Now she comes here with a sour expression on her face, as if she's walking through the threshold of a prison instead of her own home. A phone call interrupts my musings. Without even looking at the screen, I know who it is. "Good morning, Dad." Elaine's voice sounds fake cheerful. "How are you feeling today?" "The usual," I answer dryly. "Alive and well and full of energy. Trenton and I were thinking of coming over this afternoon. Is that okay?" Trenton and I. It's always we. Ever since my daughter married that realtor with the shark smile, she's been a part of him. Trenton Brooks, real estate salesman and my personal nightmare for the past 5 years. "Come on in," I say. "I'm just warning you, I'm going to object again." There's a pause on the other end of the line. Elaine knows what I mean. For the last 6 months, every visit has been the same. "Dad, this house is too big for you alone. Dad, you'll be taken care of by professionals in a nursing home. Dad, you need to think about the future. We just want to visit you," she finally says. Nothing more. The lie. I hear it in every syllable. In her 46 years, Elaine has never learned how to lie convincingly. At least not to me. "I'll be home at 4, I answer and hang up. I go back to the roses. I trim the dry branches, loosen the soil. This work calms me down, gives me something to think about. When did Elaine change? When did she stop being the girl who asked for a room with an east-facing window? Maybe when she went off to college, or when she met Trenton. Or maybe I was the one who changed after Evelyn died. Evelyn died suddenly. Heart attack. We were going to the lake for the weekend. She was baking her famous blueberry pie. I went out to the garage to get my fishing rods, came back 10 minutes later and she was on the floor. The doctors said there was nothing they could do. Sometimes the heart just stops. After she died, the house seemed huge and empty, but gradually I learned to live alone. I found my rhythm, my joys. Morning newspaper with coffee on the veranda, weekend fishing with Horace, the neighbor across the street, working in the garden, reading the books Evelyn always wanted me to read. I wasn't alone. I was alone with the memory of our life. And then the visits from Elaine and Trenton began. At first, infrequent and almost pleasant. Then more and each time, the same conversation. At 4 o'clock sharp, their silver Lexus parks in front of my house. I watch from the kitchen window as they get out of the car, Elaine in her strict insurance agent suit and Trenton in his ironed shirt and that perpetual smile of his that makes my teeth chatter. "Daddy!" Elaine hugs me, and I smell her perfume. Too sweet, not at all like the light lavender scent Evelyn used to use. You look tired. Been working in the garden, I answer, shaking Trenton's hand. His palm is soft and cool like a man who's never held anything heavier than a pen. Roland, he nods at me. It's a beautiful day today, isn't it? And your house is in perfect condition, as always. Your house. He always says it like he's appraising real estate. Well, he is. We're sitting on the veranda with the lemonade I made ahead of time. Elaine talks about work, about the new company policy, about how she doesn't have enough time for herself. Trenton inserts remarks about the Bedford real estate market, how prices are rising in our neighborhood. I listen half listening, waiting for the moment when they get to the real purpose of the visit. It comes when Elaine accidentally drops, "By the way, Dad, did you know that the Peterson house on the next street over sold for $800,000? It's smaller than yours, and the lot isn't as nice." Really? I pretend to be surprised, although I know the price of every house in the neighborhood. A good neighborhood always sells. That's right. Trenton picks up on it and his eyes light up. And with your house, Roland, with that history, with your lot, I'd value it at least $1 million. If I was going to sell it, I cut him off. But I'm not. Elaine sighs as if she's dealing with a stubborn child. Dad, we talked about this. This house is too big for you alone. You're not young anymore and stairs are becoming a problem. And at Sunny Acres, you'd have your own comfortable apartment, medical staff nearby, socializing with people your own age. My age, I chuckle. You mean with 1 foot in the grave? Don't say that. Elaine frowns. We're just worried about you. Oh, I know how worried you are. I look directly at Trenton. Especially about what's going to happen to this house when I drop my skates. Trenton has the nerve to look offended. Roland, you're being unfair. Elaine and I have only your welfare in mind. I think back to a month ago when I overheard them talking in the kitchen when they thought I was in the garden. Trenton was talking about the potential of the plot and how you could recoup your investment in a couple years. There was no mention of my well-being. Look, Dad, Elaine takes my hand, and I feel how cold her fingers are. We've arranged for Dr. Harris to come to see you tomorrow, just for a routine checkup. What doctor? I release my hand. I have my own doctor, and I saw him 2 weeks ago. Dr. Harris is a specialist in, age-related changes, Elaine says carefully, choosing her words. He'll just test your memory, your reactions, the usual tests. That's it. I'm beginning to understand. This is the 3rd specialist in the last 2 months. First a neurologist, then a psychiatrist, now this Harris guy. They're looking for proof that old man Roland is losing his mind. I'm not going to see any Dr. Harris, I say firmly. I'm of sound mind, and if you think otherwise, that's your problem, not mine. Dad! Elaine's raising her voice. You don't realize it, but you're changing. You're forgetting things. You're getting irritable. I get cranky when my folks try to put me in a nursing home against my will. Trenton intervenes, his voice soft like a man calming a nervous customer. Roland, nobody's talking about nursing home. Sunny Acres is a state-of-the-art independent living complex for seniors. You'll have your own apartment, complete freedom. And who will pay for this freedom? I'm asking you straight up. Because as far as I know, places like this cost a fortune. Well, if you sell the house, Elaine starts. We're back to square one, I stand up, signaling that the discussion is over. I'm not selling the house. I'm not moving to Sunny Acres. And I'm not going to see Dr. Harris. Elaine rises as well, her face contorted with anger. You're insufferable. We're trying to help you, and you're acting like a stubborn old man. I am a stubborn old man, I reply calmly. And this is my house. I built it with my own hands for our family. I buried your mother here, and I will die here when my time comes. But that will be my decision, not yours. Trenton puts his hand on Elaine's shoulder as if restraining her. We understand your position, Roland. Perhaps now is not the best time for this conversation. Elaine, darling, we have to go. They leave, and I hear Elaine sobbing as she gets into the car. Her tears used to break my heart. Now I know they're part of the performance. I walk back into the house, feeling a tiredness that wasn't there this morning. Family visits always exhaust me more than working in the garden. I sit down in the chair by the window, the same one Evelyn liked to sit in when she was embroidering or reading a book. "What do you think, dear?" I ask quietly, looking at her picture on the mantel. "Our girl wants to send me to a nursing home and sell our house. How did we get to this point?" The picture is silent, but I know what Evelyn would say. She's always been wiser than me on such matters. Don't judge her harshly, Roland. Everyone has their own demons. But even she would have been disappointed in what our daughter had become. I remember how Elaine changed after she met Trenton. She'd always been ambitious, but with him, she became calculating. Money, status, image. All those things became more important than family. When their son, Christopher, was born, I hoped it would soften her. But she put the child in an elite boarding school as soon as he turned 12. Now he's 18, and I see him once a year, at Christmas if I'm lucky. The next morning I wake up to the sound of rain. It's drumming on the roof, the same roof I put on with my own hands in 1997 when the old one started leaking. I know every nail in this house, every beam, every chimney. It's not just a building, it's the story of my life. I go downstairs to make coffee. I notice an envelope slipped under the door. The mailman must have brought it last night and I hadn't heard. I open it and feel a chill go through me. It's a court notice. Elaine Brooks is suing for guardianship of Roland Quincy on the grounds of his progressive dementia and inability to make adequate decisions regarding his welfare and property. My own daughter is suing me to take away my house. I sit down at my desk, hands shaking. Outside the window, the rain intensifies as if nature itself is mirroring my storm of emotions. Anger, pain, betrayal, all mixed into a bitter cocktail. But somewhere deep inside, another feeling awakens. Determination. The stubbornness that Evelyn always called my best and worst trait at the same time. "So it's war," I say aloud, clutching the paper in my hand. "Well, Elaine, if you think the old man's going to give up without a fight, you don't know your father very well." I finish my coffee, go to the phone and dial the number. It's time to prepare my defense, and I have a couple of ideas that my dear daughter and her husband will really dislike. I sit with the court notice in my hands for probably an hour. The rain outside the window had turned into a real downpour, and the monotonous noise was strangely soothing. The document was written in legal language, full of ornate wording, but its essence was simple and cruel. My daughter wanted to declare me insane and take everything I'd created in my life. Due to progressive dementia and inability to make adequate decisions. That sentence stung my eyes like acid. I read it over and over again, unable to believe Elaine could write that about her own father. Demonstratively crumpling the paper, I tossed it across the kitchen. Then, when it cooled, I picked it up and smoothed it carefully. It would still be needed. Anger is a bad counselor, and I needed a clear head right now. I went into the living room, to the old secretary where I kept important documents. Evelyn had always kept our papers in order, and after she died, I'd continued that tradition. The folders were neatly signed in her small, almost calligraphic handwriting. Insurance, taxes, medical records. I pulled out the last one and began to look through it. Here are the results of my last physical, dated May 8th. Dr. Silverman, my doctor for 15 years, wrote in black and white, "Health status is excellent for a patient in this age group. Cognitive function is fully intact." I chuckled. Of course, Elaine and her lawyers wouldn't take that into consideration. They need experts, to tell them what they need to hear. My thoughts were interrupted by the doorbell ringing. Lorna Tube, my neighbor on the right, stood on the doorstep with a large umbrella and a container in her hands. "Roland, I made a casserole and I thought you might like some," she said, shaking drops off the umbrella. "In this weather, you want something homemade." Lorna, a thin woman of 68 with short-cropped gray hair and shrewd blue eyes, was a widow like me. Her husband, Howard, had died of cancer the year before Evelyn. Our wives were friends, often going to book club together. After their deaths, Lorna and I supported each other not romantically but just neighborly, humanly. She was a teacher of English literature at Bedford High School until she retired 3 years ago. Sharp wit and directness is what I've always liked about Lorna. "Come on in." I stepped aside to let her in. "I wanted to talk to you." As Lorna settled in the kitchen, heating a casserole and making tea, I told her about Elaine and Trenton's visit, about the strange doctors, and finally about the court notice. "Oh my God, Roland!" Lorna placed a plate of steaming casserole in front of me. "I always thought Elaine was spoiled, but this is out of line." "They want my house," I said, pushing the food aside. I had no appetite. "It's simple. Trenton's probably already found a buyer or plans to subdivide the lot and build something here that will make them a profit." Lorna shook her head. "What are you going to do?" "Fight," I answered firmly. "I built this house with my own hands. Their son was born here. Evelyn died here. I'm not going to let them take it away from me and sell it off piecemeal." "You need a good lawyer," Lorna said practically. "I have a friend who knows." "I'll defend myself," I interrupted. "I've spent my whole life solving my own problems, and I'm not going to change my habits now." Lorna raised an eyebrow skeptically. "Roland, this is a court case. The legal intricacies, the procedures." "I can read and study," I replied stubbornly. "Besides, I know my daughter and her husband better than any lawyer, and I have a plan." I told Lorna that I was thinking of recording Elaine and Trenton on a tape recorder when they next discussed their plans for my house. I'm sure they'll rant, especially Trenton, who can't resist bragging about his business plans. "Did you know that records like that aren't always admissible in court?" Lorna asked. "I know," I nodded, "but it'll be my insurance. And besides, I'm not just going to rely on the tape. I need to prove that I'm sane and can take care of myself." Lorna tapped her fingers on the table thoughtfully. "You need witnesses who can confirm that you lead an active, independent life, people who interact with you regularly and can testify to your mental state." "Will you be my witness?" I asked bluntly. Lorna smiled. "Of course, but I'm not enough on my own. You need more people. Horace from across the street, Betty from the grocery store, the library staff where you borrow books." I nodded. Lorna was right. I needed to prove that I had a normal social life, not just a hermit cooped up, slowly losing my mind. "And," Lorna added, "you need to get an official medical report from an independent specialist, preferably someone with an impeccable reputation, someone the court will trust." "Do you think Elaine bribed those doctors?" I asked, though deep down I knew the answer. Lorna shrugged. "Not necessarily bribed. Maybe she just put their minds in the right place. Said she was worried about your memory, that you sometimes forget things, get irritable. Doctors are people too, Roland. They see what they expect to see." I got up from the table and began to pace the kitchen. A plan was beginning to form in my head. "Okay," I said. "Here's what we're going to do. First, I'll make an appointment with an independent neurologist, preferably in a neighboring town, to rule out any influence from Trenton or Elaine. Second, I'm going to start keeping a journal, writing down everything I do each day to show that I'm living an active life. Third, I'll write down conversations with Elaine and Trenton the next time they come to visit." "Will they come?" Lorna asked. "After they filed the lawsuit?" "Oh, they'll come," I grinned. "They won't miss the opportunity to have another good talk. Elaine will tell me how worried she is about me, how I'll be better off at Sunny Acres. And Trenton won't be able to resist mentioning how much my house is worth. Lorna nodded. You're right. But be careful, Roland. Don't give them any reason to think you suspect anything. I'll be innocent, I promised. I'll tell them I'll think about it, that I'm beginning to realize that the house is really too big for me alone. Are you sure you can play the part? Lorna looked at me skeptically. You're not the greatest actor, Roland. When your house is on the line, you become Al Pacino, I replied. The next day I went into action. I called Harrisville Medical Center, a town 30 miles from Bedford, and made an appointment with Dr. Rayner, a well-known neurologist. Then he bought a new notebook and began keeping a journal, detailing each of his days, from morning exercise to evening reading. Lorna, meanwhile, had compiled a list of potential witnesses, people who saw me regularly and could confirm that I was sane. Horace, my fishing buddy. Betty from the grocery store where I bought groceries 3 times a week. The staff at the library where I borrowed books. Even the delivery guy who brought me parts for home repairs. 3 days after receiving the notice, just as I predicted, Elaine called. Dad? Her voice sounded strained. We need to talk about the documents you received. Yes, I did, I answered, trying to make my voice sound tired and a little confused. I had to admit I was surprised. I didn't think it would come to this. It's for your own good, Elaine said, with that peculiar intonation one uses when talking to small children or old people. Trenton and I are worried about you, about your health, about your safety. Maybe you're right, I said, feigning uncertainty. Maybe the house really is getting too big for me. You know, I've been thinking about that a lot lately. A pause on the other end of the wire. Elaine clearly hadn't expected this reaction. Really? I could hear the disbelief in her voice. Well, I'm glad you're beginning to understand. Why don't Trenton and I come over tonight and talk about it? Sure, I agreed. I'll expect you at 7 o'clock. As I hung up the phone, I smiled. The bait had been taken and the fish had bitten. Now I had to prepare for their visit. I took out a small tape recorder from my desk drawer, which I had bought when I was working on the construction site. I used it to record technical details and errands. I checked the batteries, made a test recording. Everything worked perfectly. In the evening, at exactly 7 o'clock, a familiar silver Lexus pulled up. I tucked the recorder into my shirt pocket and went to open the door. Elaine and Trenton looked like they were on their way to a business meeting, not visiting their father, both of them in smart suits and tight smiles. I invited them into the living room, where I had already prepared tea and cookies, an old habit of Evelyn's, who always welcomed her guests with a treat. So, Dad, Elaine began, sitting down on the edge of the sofa, you said you'd reconsidered your attitude toward the situation. I let out a heavy sigh. Yeah, I guess you and Trenton are right. I'm getting older, and this house, it's full of memories, but maybe it's too big for one person. Trenton stepped forward, his eyes lighting up. Roland, I'm so glad you're finally seeing things realistically. This house is a wonderful asset that can provide you with a comfortable old age. Asset? I asked, as if I didn't understand. What are you talking about, Trenton? Well, the value of the house. Trenton looked a little embarrassed. Considering the location, the size of the lot, the historical value, I'd estimate it's worth at least $1,200,000 in its current condition. And if you invest in renovations and modernization, you could get as much as $1.5 million. Trenton, Elaine shushed him. That's not what we're talking about right now. No, it's interesting, I said, playing along. And what do you propose to do with the house if I move to, what's its, Sunny Acres? Elaine and Trenton exchanged quick glances. Well, the most logical option is to sell it, Trenton said carefully. The proceeds would pay for you to live in the complex and provide for the rest of your life. What if there's more money than I need for Sunny Acres? I asked innocently. Then the rest would be yours, of course, Elaine said quickly. You can dispose of it however you want. As you wish is rich, considering they've filed for guardianship of me as an incapacitated person. If their plan works, I won't even be able to manage my own socks, let alone my money. They left an hour later, clearly pleased with themselves. As soon as the door closed behind them, I pulled the tape recorder out of my pocket and stopped the recording, then rewound it and listened to it. The quality was perfect. Trenton talks about selling the house, the $1,200,000 price tag, sunny acres, and paying for me to live there. Elaine mentions court and guardianship, trying to make it seem like a formality for my benefit. I immediately called Lorna and told her about the visit. They got caught, I said without preamble. I have a tape of them talking openly about selling the house and how much money they could make from it. The day of the trial came all too quickly. 2 weeks flew by like a day, preparing, gathering evidence, talking to witnesses. I had hardly slept the night before, going over the arguments and counter-arguments in my head, imagining what Elaine's lawyer would say and how I would respond. I woke up at 4 in the morning, long before the alarm clock rang, with a heavy lump in my stomach. The trial was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the morning. I got out of bed, showered, and shaved thoroughly, trying not to hurt myself. My hands were shaking. I had to look impeccable today. I pulled my best suit out of the closet, the dark blue one I'd worn when I married Evelyn, then buried her, and now I had to defend their home against my own daughter. Life is full of bitter irony. I didn't eat breakfast. I couldn't eat a bite. I just drank coffee, strong, no sugar. At 8:30, Lorna called. "Are you ready?" she asked without preamble. "As ready as I can be," I answered, trying to make my voice sound more confident than I felt. "I'll pick you up at 9, she said. "We'll go to the courthouse together." "Thank you." I was grateful for the support. "I have all the documents with me, and the tape recorder, too." "Good," Lorna approved. "And remember, you're not alone. Horace will be there. Betty said she'd be there. And Dr. Rayner confirmed he'd be there. Their support meant more to me than I could put into words. At my age, friends are a rare treasure. Most of my old buddies have passed away or moved to Florida. But the neighbors remain, people with whom I've lived side by side for decades, sharing joys and sorrows. At 9 o'clock sharp, her modest Ford pulled up in front of my house. Lorna was dressed in an austere dark gray suit, the same one she had once worn to teach high school literature. We got into the car in silence and drove toward the courthouse. The Bedford County Courthouse was in the center of town, in an old red brick building. I'd only been here a couple times in my life. Once as a juror many years ago, and another time when I was doing the paperwork on a house. I never thought I'd be here defending my right to remain in my mind and my home. At the entrance to the courtroom, we met Horace, my neighbor and fishing buddy, a stout 70-year-old man with a tanned face and gray mustache. He shook my hand firmly. "Hang in there, old boy. We'll show them that old dogs can still bite." I nodded gratefully. Betty from the grocery store was here too, a full woman in a brightly colored dress, looking out of place in the austere courtroom. She came over and gave me a hug. "Mr. Quincy, we're all for you. No one in this town will believe you're losing your mind. You're the most clear-headed customer in my store." Her enthusiasm made me smile, and then I saw them. Elaine and Trenton walking down the hallway, accompanied by a man in an expensive suit who must have been their lawyer. Elaine looked tense but determined. Trenton, on the other hand, Trenton was simply radiant. He had a smug grin on his face, as if he'd already won the case and was counting the profits from the sale of my house. Our gazes met, and I felt a wave of anger rising inside. Trenton nodded at me as if we were business partners, not adversaries in court. Elaine averted her eyes, unable to meet my gaze. "Don't mind them," Lorna said quietly, taking me under her arm. "They're trying to piss you off. Don't let them get to you." At 10 sharp, we were ushered into the courtroom. It was a small room with wooden benches for the public, tables for the plaintiff and defendant, and a dais where the judge sat a thin woman in her 50s with a penetrating gaze and a stern expression. Judge Ramirez, I learned from the case file. I sat at the defendant's table, Lorna next to me, Elaine, Trenton, and their attorney at the plaintiff's table. The room wasn't full, but it wasn't empty either. In addition to my witnesses, a few other curious Bedford residents had shown up. These cases are always an event in small towns. All rise. Court is now in session. Case number 36, fraction 25, Elaine Brooks versus Roland Quincy, custody, the clerk announced. Judge Ramirez looked around the room, glancing at me, then at Elaine, and nodded. Sit down. Before we begin, I want to be clear. Mr. Quincy, are you sure you want to represent yourself? You have the right to counsel. Yes, Your Honor, I answered firmly. I am capable of defending myself. In fact, that's one of the issues we're here to discuss today, my ability to make decisions. Judge Ramirez raised an eyebrow slightly but nodded. Good. Let's proceed. Mr. Foster, she turned to Elaine's attorney, you represent the plaintiff. State your position. Attorney Foster rose, a tall, slender man with prematurely graying temples and the confident movements of a man accustomed to public speaking. Your Honor, he began in a sonorous voice, my client, Elaine Brooks, is petitioning the court for guardianship of her father, Roland Quincy, due to his progressive dementia and inability to make adequate decisions regarding his welfare and property. He paused, letting the words progressive dementia hang in the air like a poisonous fog. I gritted my teeth but remained silent. Mrs. Brooks watches with deep sorrow as her father, once a strong and independent man, gradually loses touch with reality. He forgets important things, becomes irritable, and refuses necessary medical attention. Most disturbingly, he stubbornly refuses to move to a specialized facility where he could receive proper care, preferring to be alone in a large house that is becoming increasingly dangerous to him. Foster spoke smoothly, with rehearsed pauses and intonation. I almost admired his skill, if I didn't know that every word was a lie. We will present the court with medical reports from 3 independent specialists who confirm Mr. Quincy's diagnosis. We will also call witnesses who will describe the defendant's increasing memory and behavioral problems. Mrs. Brooks acts solely out of love and concern for her father. She wants to ensure his safety and quality care during the last years of his life. That last sentence hit me particularly hard. In the last years of his life, as if I already had one foot in the grave. I felt Lorna soothingly touch my arm. We ask the court to grant guardianship of Roland Quincy and transfer the right to administer his estate to his daughter, Elaine Brooks, who can make responsible decisions on his behalf. Thank you, Your Honor. Foster sat down and Judge Ramirez shifted her gaze to me. Mr. Quincy, it's your turn. I rose slowly, feeling all eyes in the room on me. My heart was beating fast but steady. I was ready. Your Honor, I began, trying to keep my voice steady and confident. I categorically deny all allegations of my incapacity. I am 72 years old and in perfect health, both physically and mentally. I built the house in which I live with my own hands, and I continue to keep it in excellent condition. I have an active social life, do my own shopping, cooking, gardening, reading, socializing with friends. I paused, looking directly at Elaine. She lowered her eyes. My daughter and her husband have been constantly insisting for the past year that I sell the house and move into a nursing home, under the pretense of being concerned about my health. When I refused, they started looking for ways to declare me incompetent. I will present to the court a medical report from a respected neurologist, Dr. Rayner, who after a thorough examination found no signs of dementia or other cognitive impairment in me. I will also present witnesses who will attest that I lead a full, independent life. I paused to catch my breath. The room was quiet. Everyone was listening intently. Finally, I have an audio recording of a conversation with my daughter and son-in-law where they openly discuss their plans to sell my house after gaining custody of me. The true purpose of this lawsuit is not a concern for my welfare, but a desire to dispose of my property. I ask the court to dismiss the lawsuit as frivolous and leave me alone in my own home. Thank you, Your Honor. I sat down, feeling slightly dizzy from the exertion. Lorna squeezed my hand under the table approvingly. Judge Ramirez nodded. Good. Mr. Foster, call your first witness. Calling Elaine Brooks, the lawyer announced. Elaine rose and walked to the witness stand. After being sworn in, she sat down, nervously clasping her hands in her lap. I had never seen her so tense. Mrs. Brooks, Foster began in a soft, accommodating tone, tell the court when you first noticed the change in your father's behavior. Elaine cleared her throat. It started about a year ago, after the anniversary of Mom's death. Dad had always been strong, independent, but after that day he became different, forgetful, irritable. One day I arrived at his place and found he'd forgotten to turn off the stove. Another time he couldn't remember where he'd put his keys and accused me of hiding them. How often do you visit your father? Foster continued. Once a week, sometimes more, Elaine replied. My husband and I are very concerned about him. It's a big house. There are so many stairs, so many opportunities for accidents, and Dad's getting less and less attentive. We suggested that he move to Sunny Acres, a wonderful senior independent living complex where he would be taken care of. But he just refuses to even discuss it. Why do you think your father is so adamant about refusing to move? Elaine sighed, and tears appeared in her eyes so skillful that I almost believed them to be genuine. He can't let go of the past. This house is the last link he has to his mom. I understand his feelings, I really do, but his safety and health are more important than sentimental attachments. Have you consulted with any doctors about your father's condition? Yes, 3 different specialists, Elaine nodded. They all confirmed that Dad has the early stages of dementia. They recommended constant supervision and care, which I can't provide if I live alone. So, a specialized facility is the best option. One last question, Mrs. Brooks. What do you plan to do with your father's home if the court grants custody? Elaine seemed prepared for that question. We plan to sell the house to pay for Dad's stay at Sunny Acres. It's an expensive facility, but it will give him the best care possible. The balance will be used solely for his benefit, perhaps to pay for additional medical services or for his personal needs. Thank you, Mrs. Brooks. Foster nodded, satisfied. I have no further questions. Judge Ramirez turned to me. Mr. Quincy, would you like to ask questions of the witness? I stood up, feeling strangely calm. Now that I was facing my daughter, my fear was gone, giving way to determination. Yes, Your Honor. I stepped closer to the witness stand. Elaine, you said you visit me once a week. When was the last time you visited me before this lawsuit was filed? Elaine hesitated. I don't remember the exact date. Let me remind you. It was July 14th, 3 days before the suit was filed. You and Trenton arrived that evening and we discussed the possibility of my moving to Sunny Acres. Is that correct? Yes, I think so, Elaine replied uncertainly. And during that conversation, did you notice any signs of dementia on my part? Forgetfulness, disorientation, an inability to understand what the conversation was about? Well, you seemed distracted. Elaine was clearly choosing her words. And you suddenly agreed to consider moving even though you'd previously refused. So you took the fact that I'd changed my mind as a sign of dementia. I raised my eyebrows. Don't people have the right to change their minds? Objection, Foster intervened. The witness is not an expert in psychiatry. Sustained, the judge nodded. Mr. Quincy, please ask specific questions about the facts. All right, I agreed. Elaine, you mentioned that I once forgot to turn off the stove. When exactly was that? I don't remember the exact date, she replied. About 6 months ago. And you discovered it when you came to visit me? Yes, the stove was on and the pot was empty. Interesting, because I have an electric stove with an automatic shutoff after 2 hours of use, I said calmly. This safety feature is installed in all modern stoves. I replaced mine 3 years ago, and you were present for the installation. Don't you remember? Elaine blushed. I didn't pay attention to that feature. One more question, I continued. You said you consulted with 3 specialists about my condition. Did these specialists personally examine me? Not all of them, Elaine admitted. Dr. Harris saw you. The others consulted me based on my descriptions of your behavior. So, 2 of the 3 doctors who diagnosed me with dementia had never even met me? I couldn't hide the surprise in my voice. And they diagnosed me solely on the basis of your words? They're professionals, Elaine said stubbornly. They know what signs to look for. One last question. I looked her straight in the eye. Elaine, did you ever discuss with Trenton the possibility of selling my house to a developer named Walter Higgins to build townhouses? Elaine turned pale. No, we never… Objection! Foster jumped in. The question has nothing to do with the incapacity case. On the contrary, I turned to the judge. This issue is directly related to the plaintiff's motives. If my daughter and her husband were planning to sell my house for development before the lawsuit was filed, it calls into question their claims of concern for my welfare. Judge Ramirez thought for a moment. I sustained the objection. Mr. Quincy, if you have evidence of such intent, you can present it in your turn. For now, confine your questions to the facts stated in the testimony. I nodded. I have no further questions for this witness, Your Honor. After Dr. Harris spoke, Foster called 2 more witnesses, a nurse from Sunny Acres who praised their facility, and a neighbor, Elaine, who described how my daughter suffers seeing her father's degradation. Both had never seen me in person, and their testimony was based solely on Elaine's words. I asked them a minimum of questions. I didn't want to waste gunpowder on small game. The plaintiff has completed his presentation of evidence, Your Honor, Foster finally announced, sitting down with a smug look. Judge Ramirez nodded. Mr. Quincy, it's your turn to present evidence. Call your first witness. I stood up, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to begin by presenting the medical documents. I handed the judge a folder containing Dr. Reiner's report, as well as the results of my last physical examination with Dr. Silverman. The judge carefully reviewed the papers, then looked up. Dr. Reiner's report indicates that you show no signs of dementia or other cognitive impairment. Do you intend to call Dr. Reiner as a witness? Yes, Your Honor, I answered. He's waiting in the hallway. Good, the judge nodded. Call him. Dr. Reiner entered the room, a tall, gray-haired man of about 65 with a neat beard and intelligent eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. He looked exactly the way a leading neurologist should look, credible and competent. After being sworn in, I asked him a few questions about his experience, qualifications, and what tests he performed to evaluate my condition. Dr. Reiner described 3 hours of tests, including the MMSE, a clock drawing test, a memory and attention test, and other standard procedures. And what were the results of these tests, Dr. Reiner? I asked. You performed above average for your age group on all parameters, Dr. Reiner replied confidently. I found no signs of dementia or other cognitive impairment. Your memory, attention, logical thinking, and spatial perception are all in excellent condition. Based on your professional experience, Dr. Reiner, do you consider me capable of making independent decisions about my property and health? Absolutely, Dr. Reiner answered without hesitation. You are fully capable and, in my opinion, will remain so for the foreseeable future. Of course, no one can predict what will happen in 5 or 10 years, but for the moment your cognitive functions are fully intact. I thanked Dr. Reiner and turned it over to Foster for cross-examination. Elaine's attorney tried to catch him at odds, insinuating that Dr. Rayner might have been biased, or that 3 hours was not enough time for a full evaluation. But Rayner was unwavering and answered every question with professional confidence. I then called Betty from the grocery store, who described how I shop regularly, always remember what I need to buy, handle money and cards with no problem, and am generally the most organized shopper of all the seniors in Bedford. Horace confirmed that we go fishing every week, and I not only remember all the fishing tricks, but I often tell stories from the past with accurate details and dates. After my witnesses had spoken, Judge Ramirez asked, "Mr. Quincy, do you have any other witnesses?" I took a deep breath. This was the decisive moment. "Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to call Lorna Taub." Lorna rose from her seat and walked to the witness stand. I noticed Elaine flinch and straighten up when she saw her. They had barely spoken to each other all these years. Elaine had always thought Lorna was a boring teacher, too plain for her refined taste. She clearly hadn't expected to see her neighbor in court. After the oath of office, Lorna sat down with her hands folded in her lap, as calm and collected as ever. "Mrs. Taub," I began, "how long have you known me?" "My husband and I moved to Elm Street in 1981, Lorna answered. "So I've known you for 44 years. And how would you characterize our relationship?" "We are good neighbors and friends. Our wives were friends, used to go to book club together. After our spouses died, my husband died of cancer the year before Evelyn, we supported each other. Not romantically," Lorna smiled slightly, "but just neighborly, humanly. I often come over with home-cooked meals. You help me with minor repairs. We talk regularly." "How often do we see each other?" "Almost every day. I see you in the garden, or we meet on the street, or I drop in on you, or you drop in on me. At least 3 or 4 times a week. And during this period, especially in the last year, have you noticed any signs of deterioration in my mental state? Forgetfulness, disorientation, inappropriate behavior?" Lorna shook her head. "Absolutely none. You have always been and still are a clear-thinking, organized person. You remember all your neighbors' birthdays, you're always up to date on local news, you read complex books and can discuss them. Your house is kept in perfect order, your garden is well tended. You do your own minor repairs. You recently fixed a leaky faucet in my bathroom, which requires good coordination and memory of what tools are needed for what." I nodded, satisfied with her answers. Then I got to the point. "Mrs. Taub, did you witness my conversations with my daughter and son-in-law about the possible sale of my house?" "Yes," Lorna answered firmly. "About 2 weeks ago I was at your house when Elaine and Trenton arrived. I was going to leave, but you asked me to stay, and I waited in the kitchen while you chatted with them in the living room. The door was open, and I couldn't help but hear the whole conversation." "And what was this conversation about?" "They were urging you to sell the house and move to a place called Sun Acres. Your son-in-law, Mr. Brooks, was very vigorous in discussing the value of the house. He estimated it at $1,200,000 in its present condition, and said that after repairs the whole $1.5 million might be obtained. He also mentioned that one Walter Higgins, a real estate developer, was interested in buying the lot for townhouses and was willing to pay about $2 million, but that he would have to tear the house down to do it." There was silence in the room. I saw Elaine turn pale, and Trenton fidgeted nervously in his chair. "Besides," Lorna continued, "Mr. Brooks mentioned that Sunny Acres costs about $200,000 down payment and then $5,000 a month. Even if Mr. Quincy lives another 20 years, the complex will cost a little over $1 million, the rest of the money from the sale of the house. No specifics have been given as to its fate." "Objection!" Foster jumped up. "This is all speculation and rumors. We have no evidence that such a conversation actually took place. I calmly pulled a tape recorder from my inside jacket pocket. We have proof, Your Honor. I recorded the conversation. Your Honor, that recording was made without the consent of the participants and cannot be admitted into evidence. Judge Ramirez looked thoughtfully at the recorder. In our state, it is permissible for a conversation to be recorded by one of the participants without notice to the other parties. Mr. Quincy was a party to the conversation and had the right to record it. I am admitting this recording into evidence. I turned on the tape recorder, and the voices of Elaine and Trenton filled the courtroom. Trenton's words about 2 million, maybe 2.25 million, and the need to tear the house down were particularly clear. When the tape ended, there was dead silence in the courtroom. Mrs. Tube, I continued, do you confirm that the tape you just listened to corresponds to the conversation you heard? Yes, it's the same conversation, Lorna nodded. Word for word. I thanked Lorna and invited Foster to ask her questions. Elaine's lawyer looked confused and asked only a few formal questions about how long Lorna had known me and whether she might have misinterpreted the conversation. Lorna answered confidently, not giving in to his attempts to confuse her. After Lorna returned to her seat, Judge Ramirez asked, Mr. Quincy, do you have any other witnesses or evidence? No, Your Honor, I answered. The defense has completed its presentation of evidence. The judge nodded. In that case, we will move on to closing statements. Mr. Foster, you first. Foster stood up, looking less confident than he had at the beginning of the hearing. Your Honor, despite the evidence presented by the defendant, we still believe that it is in Roland Quincy's best interest to have custody of him. Yes, his condition may not be as serious at this point as we have suggested, but dementia is a progressive disease, and the symptoms will increase. My client is acting out of genuine concern for her father, and if there is a disagreement about the future of the home, it can be resolved in a discussion after guardianship has been established. His speech sounded unconvincing even to himself. When it was my turn, I stood up and looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, I think the facts speak for themselves. I am fully competent, as confirmed by a reputable specialist and numerous witnesses. The only reason my daughter and her husband filed this lawsuit is to gain control of my house and sell it for their own profit. This is not caring, but self-interest. I am asking the court to dismiss the lawsuit and allow me to continue to live in the home I built with my own hands as long as I am able to take care of myself. And if sometime in the future I do lose my decision-making ability, let an independent medical panel, not concerned relatives, determine that. Judge Ramirez nodded. Thank you, Mr. Quincy. The court will retire for a decision. She left the room and there was a tense silence. I sat motionless, staring straight ahead, feeling Elaine and Trenton's eyes on me, but not turning toward them. Lorna quietly placed her hand on my shoulder for support. The judge was back in just 15 minutes, unexpectedly fast for a case like this. That could have been a good or bad sign. On your feet. Court is in session, announced the clerk. Judge Ramirez sat down and looked around the room. In the case of Elaine Brooks v. Roland Quincy for custody, having reviewed all the evidence presented and heard the witnesses, the court comes to the following decision. She paused, and I felt my heart freeze for a moment. The court dismisses the guardianship action as frivolous. The defendant, Roland Quincy, is found to have full legal capacity and retains all rights to independently manage his property and make decisions regarding his health and welfare. I exhaled, feeling like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Lorna squeezed my hand tightly. Moreover, Judge Ramirez continued, her voice sterner, the court is extremely concerned about the apparent conflict of interest in the plaintiff's actions. The audio recording presented clearly demonstrates that the real purpose of the lawsuit was not the welfare of the defendant, but to gain control of his property for the purpose of selling it. She turned to Elaine and Trenton, and her gaze was cold. The court strongly recommends that the plaintiff reconsider her attitude toward parental property and respect the defendant's right to make her own decisions. This court is adjourned. The judge banged her gavel, and the tension in the room was broken by a murmur of voices. Betty ran up and hugged me. Horace shook my hand firmly. I turned to Lorna. "Thank you. I couldn't have done it without you." "Nonsense," she said with a smile. "You'd have done fine on your own. I just helped a little." At that moment I felt a presence behind me and turned around. Elaine was standing a few feet away from me, pale and tense. Trenton and Foster had already left the room, but she remained. "Daddy," she began uncertainly, "I want you to know. I've been really worried about you. It wasn't just about the money." I looked at her. My only daughter, the one I'd once carried in my arms, the one I'd read bedtime stories to, the one I'd taught to ride a bike. And I didn't see her as the little girl who asked for a room with a window to the east. I saw a stranger. "Elaine," I said quietly but firmly, "I heard the tape. I heard you and Trenton discussing the demolition of my house before you even filed the lawsuit. Don't insult me with lies about caring." "It's not that simple." She nervously rubbed the strap of her purse. "Yes, Trenton talked about selling, but I really thought you'd be better off at Sunny Acres. This house is too big, too much work." "The house is my life," I interrupted her. "I built it for our family, for you, Elaine, and the fact that you tried to take it away from me by declaring me crazy." I shook my head. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive that." Tears appeared in Elaine's eyes, this time, maybe real ones. "What now?" she asked. "You're not going to socialize with me?" I sighed. "I don't know, Elaine. I need some time. And I think you do too. Maybe one day we can have a real conversation without lies and manipulation, but not now." She opened her mouth to say something but changed her mind. She nodded, turned, and walked quickly out of the courtroom, leaving me with Lorna and the other friends. "Let's go home, Roland," Lorna said softly, taking me under her arm. "You deserve a vacation after all this." We walked out of the courthouse into the sunny day. I took a deep breath of fresh air, feeling a strange mixture of triumph and bitterness. I had won the battle for my home, but I may have finally lost my daughter. Although, to be honest, I wasn't sure I still had a daughter to lose. I lost the real Elaine years ago. "What are you going to do now?" Lorna asked as we got into her car. "Live," I answered simply. "Continue living in my house, tending to Evelyn's roses, reading books, going fishing with Horace. Do the things I've always done." "Sounds like a good plan," Lorna smiled. I nodded, looking out the window at the familiar streets of Bedford. My town, my home, my life. No one had the right to take that away from me, not even my own daughter. And I was prepared to defend my independence to my last breath. I spent the first week after the trial in a strange state. On the one hand, I was filled with a sense of relief and justice. I had defended my home and my dignity. On the other hand, I was deeply saddened by the realization that my daughter was ready to declare me incompetent for money. Every morning I woke up thinking it was just a nightmare, but reality quickly brought me back to the bitter truth. Lorna stopped by daily, bringing home cooked meals, helping me sort through paperwork after court, just sitting next to me when I didn't want to talk. Her silent support meant more to me than all the words of comfort. "You mustn't blame yourself, Roland," she said one evening as we drank tea on the veranda. "You have done nothing wrong." "I know," I replied, looking at the roses that were beginning to fade as fall approached. "But I can't help thinking, where did I go wrong in my upbringing? How did Elaine grow up to be so calculating? Evelyn was the most selfless person I knew, and I never taught my daughter to put money before family." Lorna shook her head. "Children don't always turn out the way we want them to. Sometimes outside influences are stronger than parental example. Maybe it's her husband, her environment, the values she's adopted in her world of real estate and status." I nodded, But the answer brought me no comfort. Elaine didn't call or visit. Not that I was looking forward to it. Our conversation in court had set the stage, but it still hurt. 72 years of life, and I ended up alone in a big house with memories and roses that would soon go to bed until next summer. On the 10th day after the trial, Edward, my youngest son, called. We hadn't been particularly close since he moved to the West Coast 20 years ago. He called at Christmas and birthdays and occasionally sent pictures of his family, but our relationship remained politely distant. Unlike Elaine, he never tried to get anything from me, just lived his life away from Bedford. "Dad," his voice sounded concerned, "I just found out about the trial. Why didn't you call me?" "What would it have changed, Eddie?" I asked, using his childhood nickname that he had long since outgrown. "You're 3,000 miles away with your job and your family. I made it on my own. I could have come." I could hear the resentment in his voice. "I could have supported you. It's over now," I said tiredly. "The court ruled in my favor. I'm still in my own house and in my own mind despite your sister's efforts." There was a pause, and I could hear Edward breathing heavily on the other end of the line. "I talked to Elaine," he said finally. "She claims that she was really worried about you, that the house is too big for one, and that you're getting harder as you get older." I grinned bitterly. "And you believed her?" "I don't know who to believe," Edward answered honestly. "You're both my family. But I know that Elaine has always been ambitious and practical, and this Trenton guy, I never liked him." "I have a tape of their conversation," I said, "where they openly discuss selling my house to a developer and demolishing the building to build townhouses. All of this is before I filed for a declaration of incompetency. If you want, I can send you a copy." "No," Edward answered quickly. "I believe you, and I'm sorry it's come to this." We talked some more about his work, about the kids, about the weather in Bedford and San Diego. The conversation flowed awkwardly, as if we both didn't know what to say after so many years of polite estrangement. "Dad, there's something else," Edward said before he said goodbye. "Daniel wants to talk to you. Daniel is my grandson, Edward's son, whom I've only seen a few times in my life. The last time was 3 years ago, when they went to Evelyn's funeral. He'd been 15 then, a skinny, taciturn teenager with intelligent eyes that looked so much like his grandmother's." "Of course," I agreed, surprised by this turn of events. "Grandpa?" Daniel's voice sounded deeper than I remembered, with a slight huskiness. "It's me, Daniel." "Hello, grandson," I said, trying to imagine what he looked like now at 18. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine," he replied. "I went to college, architecture school. I started this semester." "Congratulations," I said sincerely. "Evelyn would be very proud. She always said you had a talent for drawing." "I remember," he said, a warm note in his voice. "She used to show me her watercolors when we visited. Grandpa, I heard about what happened to Aunt Elaine. It's terrible." "Yeah, not the nicest family moment," I replied dryly. "Grandpa, I was wondering." Daniel paused as if gathering his wits. "Remember when you showed me how you designed your house? The blueprints, the calculations, all those details. It partly inspired me to choose architecture." I was touched. When they came to the funeral, I did show Daniel my old blueprints, just to fill a heavy pause, not expecting it to impress him. "I'm glad you're interested," I said. "Grandpa, I got into Harrisville University," Daniel continued. "It's only 30 miles from Bedford." I straightened in my chair in surprise. "Harrisville? But I thought you were going to go somewhere on the West Coast, closer to your parents." "Harrisville University has one of the best architecture programs on the East Coast," Daniel explained. I thought it would be a chance to get to know you better. I'm living in the dorms now, but—" He paused again. "Grandpa, I was wondering if I could move in with you. It's expensive to rent a room on campus, but commuting from Bedford to Harrisville is doable. Of course, I would pay for the room and help around the house." I sat stunned by this offer. My grandson, whom I barely knew, wanted to move in with me. Daniel, are you sure? I asked cautiously. Living with an old man is not the most exciting prospect for a student. Grandpa, I'm not looking for exciting prospects, he said with a confidence that was surprising for an 18-year-old boy. I want to study architecture and get to know the man who built the house with his own hands. I want to know my family, my roots. Besides, he laughed awkwardly, I'm not a big fan of loud parties and all that college craziness. I felt tears come to my eyes, the first since the trial. Your room will be ready when you decide to come, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The one with the window facing east. Thank you, Grandpa. Daniel's voice sounded happy. I'll come over next Friday if it's convenient for you. I don't have much stuff. After the conversation, I sat in the living room for a long time looking at the pictures of the family on the mantelpiece. Evelyn with baby Elaine in her arms, Edward at the prom, a family portrait taken when the kids were still teenagers. So much water had passed since then. I decided to clean up Daniel's room, Elaine's former room, the one with the east-facing window. It had been empty for years, a storage space for things I hadn't known where to put since Evelyn's death. It was time to clean it up. I spent the next few days sorting through old boxes, dusting, refreshing the room. Lorna helped me with the heavy furniture and curtains. You look younger, Roland, she said as we hung the new curtains. There's a sort of liveliness. I guess I'm just glad to have someone alive in the house again, I replied with a smile. I didn't think I'd live to see the day when I'd be looking forward to having a young neighbor. That's good, Lorna nodded. A house shouldn't just be a museum of memories. It should have life flowing through it. On Friday, I got up earlier than usual and made lunch, the meatloaf recipe Evelyn always made for special occasions. Daniel promised to be here by 3 in the afternoon. At 2:30, I was already sitting on the veranda, glancing at my watch every 5 minutes. At exactly 3, a cab pulled up to the house, and a tall young man with a backpack and a suitcase got out. Daniel had grown since the last time I'd seen him, and his shoulders were broader, but his features were the same soft, thoughtful, with the same expressive gaze. Grandfather. He waved his hand at me and smiled broadly. I rose to meet him, feeling strangely excited. We hugged, awkwardly at first, then tighter. Welcome, Daniel, I said, pulling back to get a better look at him. You've grown. It's been 3 years, he shrugged with a smile. A lot of water has passed. I helped him get his things into the house and showed him to his room. Daniel looked around with interest, ran his hand along the windowsill, looked out the window to the east. It's nice here, Grandpa. Thank you. This was your aunt's room when she was a kid, I said. She wanted a room with a window facing east so the sun would wake her up in the morning. Daniel nodded but didn't comment on Elaine's mention. Instead, he pulled a small picture frame from his backpack and set it on the table. Grandma Evelyn, he explained, noticing my gaze. This is the only picture I have of her. It was taken when you came to visit us in San Diego, remember? The year before she died. I nodded, touched that he kept a picture of Evelyn. The picture showed her standing on the beach, with her gray hair fluttering in the wind, wearing a straw hat, happy and relaxed, the way I always wanted to remember her. We went down to the kitchen and I set the table. Over lunch, Daniel talked about his first weeks at the university, his courses, his professors, his plans. I want to specialize in sustainable architecture, he explained, gesturing animatedly. Buildings that work in harmony with the environment, use renewable energy, minimize the impact on nature. That's the future, Grandpa. I listened to him with a smile, enjoying this flow of youthful energy and ideas that filled my quiet home. How did your parents feel about you moving in with me? I asked when the conversation turned to more personal topics. Daniel shrugged. Dad was surprised at first, but then he was supportive. Said it was a good idea for both of us. Mom's worried, of course, that I'm so far away, but She's always worried. And Elaine? I asked cautiously. Does she know you're here? Daniel's face turned serious. Yes, she does. Dad told her. She wasn't thrilled. Said I didn't know what I was getting into, that you were a difficult man. He raised his eyes and looked at me straight on. Grandpa, I don't believe her. I remember what you were like when we came here. Kind, patient. You showed me how to fix old clocks, taught me how to hammer nails. Aunt Elaine was always, different. Always talking about money, about status, about the importance of making the right choices in life. I nodded, surprised by his insight. Elaine and I have different views on life, I said neutrally, not wanting to turn my grandson against his aunt despite everything that had happened. I know about the trial, Grandpa, Daniel said quietly. I know what she tried to do. It's wrong. Yes, it's wrong, I agreed. But what's done is done. Now we all have to move on with our lives. Daniel nodded, then smiled suddenly. You know, I'm glad you didn't give in, that you stood up for your home. It's worth it. After lunch, we went out into the garden. I showed Daniel Evelyn's roses, the fruit trees I'd planted years ago, the gazebo I'd built with my own hands. This house isn't just a building, I said, looking around the property. It is the story of my life. Every corner, every board, every flower has a story. I understand, Daniel nodded, and I want to know those stories, Grandfather, every single one. That evening, as Daniel went to unpack, I sat in my chair by the window, pondering the unexpected turn of events. Until 2 weeks ago, I had been on the verge of losing everything that mattered to me. Now, my home was once again filled with life, with youth, with hope. I looked at Evelyn's picture on the mantel. What do you think, dear? Looks like life isn't over yet. I could have sworn that her smile in the photograph grew a little wider in the soft evening light. The next morning, I woke up to sounds in the kitchen. Going downstairs, I found Daniel preparing breakfast, scrambled eggs and bacon and toast. Good morning, Grandpa, he smiled. I hope you don't mind me taking over your kitchen. My mom taught me to cook in high school, said it was a necessary skill for independent living. Your mom is a wise woman, I nodded approvingly, sitting down at the table. Breakfast was delicious, and we ate it in pleasant conversation about the day's plans. Daniel was going to go to the university to pick up some textbooks, and then he offered to help me with a little terrace renovation I'd been putting off for months. I'm no expert, of course, he said, but I'm good at following instructions, and it will be good for me to learn practical skills from you. When he left, I called Lorna to tell her about my grandson's arrival. She was delighted for me and promised to drop in for tea to meet Daniel. The afternoon passed in pleasant chores. Daniel and I fixed the terrace, and he proved to be a capable student, attentive, tidy, with good spatial reasoning. No wonder he chose architecture. That evening, over dinner prepared by Lorna, who had dropped by for a visit, Daniel asked, Grandpa, have you ever thought of writing down the history of this house? All the details of its construction, all the changes you've made over the years. It could be interesting not only for the family, but also as a study material for students like me. I hesitated. You know, I never thought of that, but it's a good idea. Maybe we could do it together. I'd narrate, and you'd take notes and make drawings. Daniel's eyes lit up. That would be wonderful, Grandpa. A real grandfather and grandson project. Lorna nodded approvingly. That's a wonderful idea. Roland had always been a great storyteller. There was just usually no one to listen. That night, lying in bed, I thought about the unexpected turn my life had taken. Not so long ago, I had been alone, fighting for the right to stay in my home, bitterly aware of my daughter's betrayal. Now my home was once again filled with life, with plans, with hope. Yes, the relationship with Elaine was probably irretrievably damaged. Too deep a wound, too serious a betrayal. But I found a connection with my grandson that I never dreamed possible. Daniel was so unlike his aunt, There was no calculating, greedy status-seeking in him. He was like Evelyn, with her kindness, her curiosity, her respect for history and tradition. I realized that true family is not just blood ties. It is mutual respect, shared values, and a willingness to accept each other for who we are. Elaine was my daughter in blood, but not in spirit. Daniel, whom I had barely known until now, seemed closer to my heart than she had ever been as an adult. As I fell asleep, I felt a strange peacefulness. Life went on, taking unexpected forms, and maybe the most important chapters of my story were yet to be written. Along with my grandson, who wanted to know his roots and the history of the house his grandfather had built,